If you want to be here for the next one, subscribe to Midnight Lore. It only takes a second. Now, let's begin. Get comfortable. Let everything slow down around you. This story begins before the world you explore in Elden Ring existed, before the great golden tree, before the queen who made herself eternal, before the wars and the shattering and the demigods who tore the lands between apart, fighting over pieces of something none of them fully understood. It begins with something much older, in the time before recorded history, in the period that the lands between remembers only in fragments, in the descriptions of ancient incantations and the whispered lore of things that survived from before the current order. There was a different kind of life in the world, not civilizations in the sense that would come later, not kingdoms and orders and hierarchies of power organized around a central divine authority. Something more fundamental, a something that the later age would call the Crucible. The Crucible was the primordial form of life in the lands between. Not a place exactly, though it is sometimes described as though it occupies one. More of a condition, a state of existence in which different forms of life were not yet separated from each other, not yet organized into discrete categories with clear boundaries between them. Life in the age of the Crucible was blended together in ways that later eras would find monstrous. Creatures with features drawn from multiple biological traditions, animals with human qualities, humans with animal ones, aspects of different species sharing space in single bodies without contradiction. Because the division between species was not yet the fundamental law of biology it would later become, and the Crucible is described in the lore of certain incantations, specifically the aspects of the Crucible spells that the Tarnished can find and use in the game, as the primal force of the Erdtree's energy, the primordial crucible in which all life was once blended together. This description tells us two things simultaneously: that the Crucible predated the Erdtree, and that the Erdtree grew from it. The relationship between the two is not one of replacement, so much as transformation. The newer order was built on top of the older one, using the Crucible's power as its foundation, even as it suppressed and eventually denied the older order's validity. The specific thing that caused this transformation is a cosmic event that the lands between's people understand only in the most general terms: the arrival of the Greater Will. The Greater Will is an outer god. This term, outer god, is one of the most important concepts in Elden Ring's cosmology, and it is worth understanding clearly. The lands between is not the only world in Elden Ring's universe, and the forces that shape it are not all native to it. An outer god is exactly what the name suggests: a divine power that exists outside the world, at a cosmic distance, whose influence reaches into the lands between through agents and artifacts and carefully constructed systems of dependence. Outer gods do not walk in the world they influence. They work through intermediaries. They establish presences and create beings who will carry out their will at the local level. The Greater Will is the most powerful and most active outer god in Elden Ring. It is the god of order, of the imposition of structure and law and hierarchy on a world that, left to the Crucible's blending tendencies, would remain fluid and undifferentiated. The Greater Will desires organization. It desires a world where things are sorted and ranked and governed by comprehensible rules, not because it is interested in the well-being of the people who live in that world, but because a world organized according to order is a world that can be controlled. The Greater Will sent a golden star to the lands between. This is how the lore describes it. A golden star bearing a beast, launched from somewhere in the cosmos toward the world that the Greater Will had identified as its next domain. The beast that arrived in that star was the Elden Beast, and the Elden Beast was, in a sense, the Greater Will made physical, a living embodiment of the concept of order, capable of existing within the lands between and establishing the Greater Will's influence from inside the world, rather than from outside it. The Elden Beast's arrival is not depicted in the game with any drama. It happened long before the events of the story, and the lands between's current inhabitants mostly understand it through faith and fragment, rather than through direct historical account. But the consequences of that arrival are everywhere. The Elden Beast eventually became, or was transformed into, or was forged as, the Elden Ring, the great magical construct that governs the rules of reality in the lands between. The ring made of runes, each rune a law, each law an aspect of the order that the Greater Will wanted to establish and maintain. The Elden Ring is not simply a powerful magical item. It is the constitution of the lands between, the thing that determines what is possible and what is not, what is permitted and what is forbidden, what life and death mean and how they work. When you change the Elden Ring, when you remove a rune, or shatter it, or add something to it that was not there before, you change the fundamental rules of the world. This is why its destruction and repair are the axis around which the entire story of the game rotates. But before the Elden Ring could be what it became, the Greater Will needed a human agent, not because the Elden Beast was insufficient, but because a purely cosmic presence cannot do the work of governance at the local level. It cannot speak to people in terms they understand. It cannot make the moral and political and military decisions that establishing and maintaining an order requires. The Greater Will needed someone who could be elevated to godhood and serve as its representative in the lands between. Someone who could hold the Elden Ring and be the face of the order it embodied. The two fingers were the Greater Will's emissaries in the physical world. Ancient finger-like beings. They appear in the game as literal enormous hands, two fingers extended, wrinkled and vast, and possessed of an almost alien quality. They served as the channel through which the Greater Will communicated with the world it sought to govern. They could not communicate directly or quickly. The distance between the Greater Will and the lands between was too great for that. But they could identify the right person. They could designate an Empyrean, a human being with the specific qualities required to become a vessel for the Elden Ring, and guide that person toward the transformation that would make them a god. The person they identified was a woman named Marika. Marika was not originally from the lands between. She was a Numen, a member of a people from beyond the world, one of the groups that had made their way to the lands between over the long centuries of its history. She was chosen by the Two Fingers as an Empyrean, someone who could receive the Greater Will's blessing, undergo the transformation at the gate of divinity, and become not merely a powerful human, but something genuinely divine. A god, the queen of the world. The process by which Marika became queen is not simply a story of divine appointment. It is a story of conquest. The lands between, when Marika began her rise, was not empty. It was populated by civilizations that predated the Greater Will's arrival. Societies with their own gods and their own traditions and their own ways of relating to the world that the Crucible had produced. There were dragons, ancient and powerful, who had their own relationship to cosmic forces that the Greater Will's arrival had not replaced. There were giants in the cold mountains to the north, enormous and old, whose fires had their own mythological significance and whose god, the Fell God, was a direct competitor to the authority the Greater Will was trying to establish. There were humans of various cultures scattered across the landscape. The Crucible Knights, who served the ancient traditions of the blended life. The Misbegotten, beings who carried the mixed heritage of the Crucible's age in their bodies. Various others, each with their own piece of the old world that the new order was about to transform. Marika did not simply accept an empty throne and declare herself queen. She fought for it. The war against the giants, the campaign to destroy the fire giants of the Mountaintops and extinguish the Fell God's power, was one of the major military operations of her rise. She used a man named Godfrey as her weapon and her first Elden Lord, the general whose campaigns established the Golden Order's military dominance over the lands between. Godfrey was formidable beyond any ordinary warrior's scale, a man of such martial capability that the Greater Will had blessed him with a golden spirit lion as a companion, a manifestation of his prowess that walked beside him as a physical expression of divine favor. Together, Marika and Godfrey conquered. They fought the giants. They suppressed the old traditions. They transformed the primordial Crucible into the Erdtree, a physical structure that embodied the Greater Will's order and served as both the symbolic and literal center of the new world. The great golden tree, visible from every corner of the lands between, was not something that existed before Marika's ascension. It was something she created or called into being through the planting of a golden seed during the war. The Crucible's diffuse energy was concentrated, organized, given a single center from which it could be governed. The Erdtree became the heart of the Golden Order, everything that would define the lands between for the centuries of Marika's reign, the nature of life and death, the flow of grace that blessed the worthy, the system of souls returning to the tree upon death and being redistributed through the world's catacombs, was organized around the Erdtree. It was beautiful. It was also, in ways that the current inhabitants of the lands between mostly do not fully understand, a system of control. The souls that returned to the Erdtree were not simply completing a natural cycle. They were feeding it. The tree grew on the dead. The Greater Will's power in the lands between was sustained by the continuous return of souls to the structure that embodied its order. This is what the lands between was built on. Not simply a religion or a political order, but a metaphysical arrangement in which a cosmic intelligence maintained its influence over a world through a structure that appeared to offer salvation, and in fact collected what it needed to sustain itself. Marika understood this better than anyone. What she decided to do about that understanding is the beginning of everything that followed. Rest now. The age of the Erdtree was long, and its end is a story worth telling slowly. Welcome back. Settle in. Let your breathing slow. In the last part, we established the foundations, the greater will, arriving from somewhere beyond the world, the Elden Beast, its golden vassal, becoming the Elden Ring, Marika, chosen by the two fingers, elevated to godhood through conquest and transformation, the Crucible replaced by the Erdtree, the lands between organized at last, according to the principles of the Golden Order. Now we live inside that order for a while. We see what Marika built, what it gave the people who lived under it, and what it cost them. We meet the children she had, and the secrets she kept, and we arrive at the night that unmade everything. The Golden Order, at its height, was genuinely impressive. This is worth acknowledging before we examine its failures. Marika's achievement was real. She had taken a world of competing civilizations and fractured gods and primordial chaos and imposed on it a coherent structure that most people could live within. The Erdtree's blessing touched everything. Grace, the golden luminance in the eyes of those who received it, visible as a literal light, marked the people of the lands between as participants in the order Marika had established. It meant favor. It meant a place in the world. It meant that death, when it came, was not simply an ending, but a return. A soul traveling back to the Erdtree through the catacombs to be held and eventually released again into the cycle of life. Marika also did something that no previous power in the lands between had done. She removed death from its natural function, and the Rune of Death, one of the great runes that constituted the Elden Ring, governing the specific mechanism by which living things ceased to exist, was sealed away. Marika entrusted its sealing to her shadow-bound beast, Malekith, the Black Blade. Malekith carried the Rune of Death within his black blade, containing it, preventing it from functioning in the world. The consequence was that the people of the lands between, blessed by Erdtree grace, could not permanently die. They could be killed, their bodies could be destroyed, but their souls would simply return to the Erdtree and eventually return to life. True, permanent, irreversible death was removed from the equation. Immortality, on its face, seems like an obvious good. But the removal of the Rune of Death had consequences that Marika understood better than most of the people living under the Golden Order. Death gives life its shape. The knowledge that time is limited, that choices matter because they cannot be infinitely revised, that the people around you are irreplaceable because they will not always be there. All of this depends on death being real. Without death, something specific is lost. The lands. Between's immortal inhabitants felt it, in ways they could not always articulate. A gradual erosion of the weight of experience, the specific kind of madness that comes from endless repetition without genuine consequence. The lands between before the Shattering was, for many of its people, a place of quiet, creeping despair that the golden light of grace could not quite mask. Marika had children. The specific family tree of the lands between's divine rulers is one of the most significant aspects of the world's lore, and it is complicated enough that it is worth tracing carefully. Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, was Marika's first husband. Together, they had 3 children, Godwyn the Golden, and the twins Mohg and Morgoth. The twins were born with the Omen Curse, a mark that manifested as physical deformity, the presence of horns and unusual biological features that the Golden Order considered impure. Despite being the children of Marika herself, they were hidden away in the depths beneath the capital, their existence a source of shame for an order that prized the aesthetic of golden perfection over biological reality. Godwyn was different. He was everything the Golden Order produced at its best. Noble, capable, beloved, a warrior and diplomat who had earned genuine respect rather than simply inheriting it through proximity to his mother's power. He fought the ancient dragons and made peace with them. He was celebrated across the lands between as the Golden Order's finest product. If the Golden Order was going to produce a future, Godwyn was what that future was supposed to look like. Eventually, Godfrey's usefulness to Marika's project was completed. The last of her enemies had been conquered. The lands between was pacified, and Marika, in a decision whose full implications are still debated by the lands between scholars and the Tarnished, who later pieced together the history, stripped Godfrey of his grace. She sent him and his warriors away, across the sea of fog, into distant lands, to wage war in exile. She called them Tarnished, people who had been divested of the golden light in their eyes, who no longer had the blessing of the Erdtree, who were cut off from the order that had shaped their entire existence. Her promise to them, as she sent them away, was that grace would be restored after death, that the long march they were beginning would end eventually with return. It was not a comfort she expected them to need soon. After Godfrey's exile, Marika took a second consort. His name was Radagon, and he was remarkable in ways that would not become fully apparent for a very long time. Radagon had been a champion of the Golden Order, a powerful warrior who had married the Carrion Queen Rennala, and then, when the political situation changed, left her to become Marika's second Elden Lord. With Rennala, he had 3 children, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni, step demigods in the Golden Order's hierarchy, carrying Radagon's power and their Carian mother's traditions simultaneously. With Marika, after their marriage, he had 2 more children, Malenia and Miquella. The truth about Radagon, which the game reveals in one of its most quietly devastating lore discoveries, is this: Radagon and Marika are the same person, not metaphorically, not in some spiritual sense, the same being in 2 bodies, both of which are real and both of which have distinct thoughts and personalities and agendas. When Marika needed a second consort, she split herself, externalizing a different aspect of herself as a separate person, a person who then lived an independent life and developed differently from the self he had come from. At the fact that Marika shattered the Elden Ring and Radagon tried to repair it using the same hammer in the same location says something important about the internal conflict this arrangement had produced. The 2 halves of the same being had reached irreconcilably different conclusions about what should be done with the world. Malenia and Miquella were extraordinary even by demigod standards. Malenia carried a curse, the Scarlet Rot, a disease connected to one of the outer gods who opposed the greater will, which manifested in her body as a constant biological war between her own divine nature and the rot trying to consume her. She could not be permanently defeated. Every wound she received, her body partially healed itself by feeding on the life force of those around her. She was the greatest warrior in the lands between, and also someone who lived in constant agony, slowly losing herself to the rot that existed in the very cells that made her who she was. Miquella was different. He was born with the curse of eternal youth, a body that would never age past the appearance of a child, regardless of how his mind and power developed. He was, by many accounts, the most gifted demigod the world had produced, capable of the kind of magic and understanding that exceeded even his extraordinary siblings. He loved his sister deeply and spent years trying to find a cure for the scarlet rot that was consuming her, developing the Haligtree as an alternative sacred space to the Erdtree, working within and around the limitations of his curse to build something new. This is the family, and these are the people who will inherit the ruins of the Golden Order and make of those ruins what each of them believes they should become. The event that shattered the Order, the Night of the Black Knives, was orchestrated by Ranni. Ranni was Radagon's daughter by Rennala, and therefore Marika's stepdaughter. She was an Empyrean herself, identified by the two fingers as someone who could potentially serve as the next vessel for the Elden Ring, the next great god of the lands between. This designation was not one she welcomed. Ranni had no interest in serving the Greater Will's agenda. She had no interest in becoming another instrument of an order she found fundamentally corrupting. She wanted something else, something that she would pursue with extraordinary patience and intelligence across the entire span of the game's story. A different age, governed by a different principle, free from the Greater Will's control. To achieve her freedom from the two fingers, Ranni needed to die. Not truly die. She wanted to preserve her soul while shedding the body that the two fingers could claim. The specific mechanism she identified for doing this required that another soul die simultaneously with her body, splitting the curse mark of death that the black knives would carve into her flesh. The soul she chose was Godwyn's. She stole a fragment of the rune of death from Malekith, the sealed death that the Golden Order had kept locked away for centuries. She used it to create the Black Knives, a weapons capable of killing what the normal order of the lands between could not. She found her instruments in the Black Knife assassins, Numen women, like Marika herself, who had ties to the Queen, and who, for reasons the lore does not entirely explain, were willing to participate in what Ranni was planning. On a bitter night, the assassins came to Leyndell. They found Godwyn the Golden. They killed him. Not simply killed him, but killed him in the specific way that the fragment of the rune of death allowed, killing only his soul while leaving his body alive. It was the cruelest possible death, a body without the person inside it, continuing to exist, to grow, to mutate, rooted in the depths beneath the Erdtree, in a state of half-death that the Golden Order had no framework for. Ranni's plan worked. Her Empyrean body perished at the same moment as Godwyn's soul, the curse mark splitting between them. She preserved her soul in a doll, freeing herself from the two fingers' claim on her, beginning her long, slow project of resistance against the Greater Will. But the consequences of Godwyn's murder extended beyond what Ranni had intended or planned for. The fragment of the rune of death she had used had leaked into the Erdtree's root system through Godwyn's body. Death was spreading through the tree that governed death. The death root, the corrupted form of the rune of death as it spread through the Erdtree's underground network, was producing those who live in death, people who refused the Erdtree's call, who could not die properly, or who existed in the space between death and the Erdtree's recycling, in a state that the Golden Order had no philosophical framework for accommodating. And Marika, when she heard what had happened to her golden son, did something that she may have been planning for a long time. Or perhaps she did it in grief, in rage, in the specific kind of despair that comes from watching the most precious thing in your world be taken from you in a way you cannot undo. She picked up her hammer. She struck the Elden Ring. She shattered it. The great runes that constituted the Elden Ring, each one a law, each one an aspect of the world's governing order, scattered into the lands between. Marika's demigod children, feeling the power of those scattered runes, claimed them. And the taint of that power, the specific corruption that the great runes produced in the minds of those who held them, drove the demigods to war against each other, the Shattering, the war from which no victor arose. Faction against faction, demigod against demigod, the world that the Golden Order had built becoming the terrain of a conflict so catastrophic that it hasn't ended by the time the story begins. Khalid, poisoned by the meeting of Malenia and Radahn. Stormvale contested and scarred. The capital sealed behind the Elden Ring's thorns, waiting for something that has not yet come. The world in the state we find it in when we first step onto the shore of Limgrave, and Marika, for her act of shattering, was punished. The greater will, or the Elden Beast, its physical presence in the lands between, imprisoned her within the Erdtree, crucified within the great golden tree she had created, unable to leave, unable to act, present in the world only as a mystery and a ruin, and the faint traces of grace that still guided those she had promised would return. The Tarnished, Godfrey's old warriors and their descendants, stripped of grace for generations, wandering in distant lands. Marika's promise now called to them. The grace returned to their dead eyes, and they began the journey back across the sea of fog. Sleep well. One of them is you, and you are almost here. Welcome back. Let the world go quiet around you. You are the Tarnished. This is where the story you participate in begins. Not at the beginning of history, not at the moment the greater will sent its star to the lands between, not even at the night of black knives. It begins with you, waking on a shore. The specific circumstances of your resurrection are worth understanding. You died somewhere, at some point, as all Tarnished do eventually. But the grace that Marika promised Godfrey's exiled warriors, the restoration of the golden light in their eyes, the signal that they were called back to the lands between, returned to you. This is what it means to be tarnished and called. You are someone who was living, or had lived, outside the lands between. Someone who carried the specific biological heritage of people who were stripped of grace when Godfrey was sent away. And now the grace has come back. Grace in Elden Ring is not simply a mystical feeling. It is directional. It points towards something. The golden wisps that drift in specific directions across the landscape are not decorative. They are instructions, however oblique, from whatever power is still trying to guide the Tarnished toward their purpose. The two fingers, the greater will's emissaries, are the ones sending this guidance, even if what they want and what the world actually needs are questions the story leaves productively unresolved. What the guidance points toward immediately is a woman named Malenia. Malenia is one of the most mysterious figures in Elden Ring, and her mystery is load-bearing. The questions about who she actually is inform some of the story's most significant choices. She introduces herself as someone without a body, someone whose soul exists, but whose physical form is absent in a way she does not fully explain. She was born, she says, inside the Erdtree, a statement whose implications accumulate as the story progresses and are never entirely resolved. She offers a pact. She will accompany the Tarnished, serving as their finger maiden, the guide and companion that Tarnished are supposed to have, and that the Tarnished begins the game without. In exchange, she asks only that when the time comes, the Tarnished take her to the base of the Erdtree. Her purpose, as it will eventually become clear, is specific. She is the kindling, the fire that will burn the Erdtree, and allowing the Tarnished to enter it requires a sacrifice. Malenia was given this purpose inside the Erdtree by Marika, it is implied, though Malenia is not certain of the specific details of her own origin. She carries the death she was made for without drama, accompanying the Tarnished through the lands between, with a quality of sad acceptance that makes her one of the most human characters in the game, despite the ambiguity surrounding her nature. The Roundtable hold. This is the second thing you find, a place that exists outside the normal geography of the lands between, accessible only through grace, where Tarnished who have been called to the quest gather. It is maintained by an entity called the Two Fingers and a woman named Ania, who reads the Two Fingers' impossible gestures and translates them into comprehensible speech. And the Tarnished who occupy the hold are a varied group, each with their own relationship to the quest and their own reasons for being there. Gideon Ofnir, called the All-Knowing, runs the hold with the specific brand of controlled authority that comes from someone who has survived here longer than almost anyone else, and has used that time to accumulate knowledge rather than to make progress toward the actual goal. He is useful and untrustworthy simultaneously, someone who knows things and shares them selectively, whose ultimate agenda is not precisely what he presents it as. The Roundtable is a place of resources and information, but it is not a place of simple alliance. The Two Fingers tell you what you need to do. Collect the great runes. Defeat the demigods who hold them. Repair the Elden Ring. Become Elden Lord. This is your quest, and the first step is Stormveil Castle, and the demigod within it. Godric the Grafted is the first major demigod most Tarnished encounter, and he is a useful introduction to what the Shattering has done to Marika's children. He is not impressive, he is not noble. He is, in almost every respect, a failure. Someone who had access to divine power and used it in the most petty and desperate way imaginable. Godric is a distant descendant of Godfrey's golden lineage, not a close one, not someone who could credibly claim the kind of primacy that the other demigods possessed. He was at the court of Lindel when the Shattering happened, and when the fighting began between the more powerful demigods, he hid. He disguised himself among the women to escape the capital. He fled Limgrave rather than face General Radahn in battle. He insulted Malenia and then begged for mercy when she responded to the insult. He ended up in Stormvale Castle with an army of followers who were, mostly, people who had also fled the more intense conflicts of the Shattering and needed somewhere to land. He had a great rune, the Anchor Ring, a piece of the Elden Ring that sat at the center of its structure and whose power, when fully activated, raises all of a person's fundamental attributes. It was a powerful thing to have, and having it was not enough to make Godric feel powerful. The grafting was his attempt to address that inadequacy. It is one of the most disturbing details in Elden Ring, not because the concept is unique in the history of the lands between, but because of the specific desperation it reveals. Grafting means attaching the limbs and bodies of other creatures to yourself, absorbing their capabilities. You encounter it throughout Stormvale Castle in its most extreme forms. Piles of severed limbs, bodies used as raw material for Godric's experiments, the grafted science. Creatures that appear to be composed of multiple children's bodies assembled into something new and terrible. Godric himself arrives at the boss encounter looking wrong in a specific way. He has grafted so many limbs onto himself that the shape of him is no longer coherent. And when the fight turns against him, he tears off his own arm and replaces it with a dragon's head, channeling fire through the grafted creature's biology. It is a powerful technique. It is also the act of someone who has run out of ideas and is improvising desperately from the materials available. He dies. His great rune passes to you, and the way north opens. Liurnia of the Lakes is the next region, a vast flooded landscape of shallow water and ancient towers, dominated by the Raya Lucaria Academy that rises from the water like an act of geological ambition. The Academy is the center of glintstone sorcery in the lands between, the place where the magical tradition that predates the Erdtree and exists in complicated tension with the Golden Order has been studied and refined for centuries. Its history is bound up with Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, who was Radagon's first wife before he left her for Marika, and who has been sitting in the Academy's inner library ever since, in a state of grief-induced madness, endlessly attempting to rebirth something from the golden remnants of the letter Radagon left to her. Rennala is one of the sadder figures in the game. She was a brilliant queen, a powerful sorcerer, the head of a great institution. She had 3 children with Radagon, and then Radagon chose Marika over her, chose the political and divine alliance over the relationship they had built. And Rennala, who had given everything to that relationship, came apart. The Academy students protect her obsessively, not because they serve her in any functional sense, but because they love her and cannot watch her suffer without doing something. What they have managed to do is build a shell around her grief. She is not a true shard bearer. Her great rune is what the game calls the Great Rune of the Unborn, and which governs rebirth rather than providing a direct power enhancement. It is the rune that allows the Tarnished to respecialize themselves, to rebuild who they are from the same materials. There is something appropriate about Rennala, endlessly trying to rebirth what she has lost. holding the rune that allows renewal. After Rennala, the quest continues into Caelid, the devastated eastern region, the place where the most catastrophic single battle of the Shattering occurred. Radahn, one of Radagon's sons by Rennala, and Malenia, one of Marika's children, met in battle here. The specific causes of their confrontation are not entirely clear, but the consequences are among the most visible in the entire game. Malenia, pushed to her limit in the fight, unbloomed. The scarlet rot inside her released in an explosion of biological contamination that transformed Caelid from a functioning region into a festering ruin of disease and mutation. The rotting, the corruption, the specific quality of wrongness that permeates every inch of Caelid is the direct physical consequence of one demigod fighting another to the edge of their respective limits. Radahn survived, but he was infected by the scarlet rot during the battle, and the rot that fills Caelid now lives in him. It did not kill him. Nothing kills Radahn permanently, because Marika's removal of the Rune of Death means that even the scarlet rot cannot do what it would naturally do. But it destroyed his mind. General Radahn, who was once the greatest warrior in the lands between, and also a serious scholar of gravity magic, who loved his horse Leonard with a devotion that is one of the game's most quietly touching character details, who learned gravity magic specifically so that his horse could carry his enormous weight without suffering. This person is gone. What remains in Caelid is something that fights and rages and cannot be reasoned with. His followers, the Redmane Knights, organize tournaments in his name, calling in champions from across the lands between to try to kill their general, which is the most dignified end they can offer him. It is one of the more genuinely moving institutions in the game. People who loved someone, trying to give that someone the death that the corruption of the scarlet rot denied him. You fight Radahn. You take his great rune, and the stars, and which Radahn had been holding in place with his gravity magic to prevent a specific astrological event he did not want to occur, are released. Something falls from the sky. Sleep well. The story is still finding its shape, and the most significant events are still ahead. Welcome back. Let everything slow. The star fell from the sky because Radahn died. That is the direct mechanical consequence of his death. The gravity magic he had been using to hold the stars in place was released the moment he was defeated, and the specific star that Ranni had been waiting for, the one whose arrival was connected to her plan in ways that the story gradually reveals, finally reached its destination. It struck Limgrave, creating the crater and the floating suspended rock that marks the entrance to Nokron, the Eternal City. Nokron. This is one of the places in Elden Ring that expands the world from a two-dimensional map into a genuine three-dimensional history. The Eternal Cities, Nokron and Nokstella, are underground, beneath the surface of the lands between, vast and ancient and inhabited by people who have been down here for so long that the sky is a distant memory. They exist in a different relationship to the laws of the lands between than the surface world does. The Greater Will's order does not reach them the same way. The Eternal Cities predate the current dispensation in ways that have allowed them to develop differently. Their magic is different. Their relationship to death is different. Their architecture is different in the specific way that things are different when they have been growing in isolation from the dominant culture for a very long time. The inhabitants of the eternal cities, who appear as translucent beings in the game, and carry a curse that resulted from their attempt to reach for something forbidden. They once tried to reach into the heavens using their own crafted facsimile of the two fingers, and the punishment for this attempt was extreme. They have been underground ever since, their form slowly becoming incorporeal, their history the story of people who reached too far and are still paying for it. The treasure Ranni wants from Nokron is the Finger Slayer blade, a weapon forged from a corpse. The corpse description is specific and significant. That is capable of doing something that normal weapons cannot, killing the two fingers, the emissaries of the Greater Will, the beings through which the Greater Will exerts its influence on the world. Ranni orchestrated everything. The Night of Black Knives, the death of her own body, at the 20-year patient waiting, in order to be free of the two fingers' claim on her. And now she intends to ensure they cannot reassert that claim by eliminating them entirely. Ranni is not simply a rebel. She is a visionary. She knows what she wants to replace the Greater Will's order with. Not nothing, not chaos, but a different kind of age, organized around a different principle. She calls it the Age of Stars, an age in which the order that governs the world comes not from the Greater Will's imposed structure, but from the cold, beautiful distance of the moon and the stars, a less controlling order, one that allows for the kind of freedom that the Greater Will's regime has never permitted. She describes it as a lonely path, a dark path, and she describes it without apology. She is going to upend the whole of what came before, and she is asking the Tarnished to help her do it. Her quest line, which is the most elaborate in the game, takes the Tarnished through the underground world, through Nokron, through the Ensel River, through Nokstella, and eventually through the Lake of Rot, which is a vast underground lake of scarlet rot, whose existence is one of the more disturbing geographical revelations of the game, to a place where Ranni has descended to complete her purpose. The Cathedral of Manuselles, an ancient structure that holds the body of a god, the specific god whose demise Ranni has been working toward since before the Night of Black Knives. Here, the Tarnished places a ring on Ranni's finger, completing the pact between them, and Ranni departs into the cosmos to follow the dark path to whatever she is working toward. Ablad is Ranni's half-wolf companion, her shadow, a being bound to her by the Greater Will specifically to prevent her from carrying out exactly what she carries out. He is loyal to Ranni in a way that transcends the purpose he was created for. He knows what she did. He knows that the Greater Will has ordered him to stop her. He cannot choose between these two loyalties, and the impossibility of the choice eventually destroys him. The Tarnished must kill Blade at the end of his story, not as an enemy but as a mercy, because what the conflict between his binding and his love has done to him is not survivable. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, represents a different kind of rebellion against the Golden Order, and it is worth understanding him as something other than simply a villain. He was a son of Radagon, a demigod with access to genuine power, and he looked at what the Golden Order was asking the demigods to do: fight each other over scraps of the Elden Ring's shattered power, serve the Greater Will's agenda, perpetuate a system whose fundamental purpose was to benefit a cosmic entity rather than the people living in it. And he found it disgusting. He had a position of considerable strength. He used it to rebel. His rebellion took a specific form that reflects his specific understanding of power. If the gods consumed their subjects, he would turn that dynamic around. The serpent of blasphemy that Rykard merged with is a creature of genuine antiquity, predating the Golden Order's dominance, embodying a kind of primal appetite that exists outside the system of grace and Erdtree. By merging with it, Rykard became something that the Golden Order could not easily categorize or control. He invited those who had been consumed by the gods to come to Volcano Manor and be part of something different. Volcano Manor is one of the game's most atmospheric locations. A manor built inside or near a volcano, ruled by a woman named Tanith, who loves Rykard with a complete sincerity that is one of the game's stranger emotional notes. Tanith recruits Tarnished, who arrive at the manor, inviting them to join the recusants, those who reject the Golden Order and its demands. She sends them on assassination missions against other Tarnished who are too devoted to the Greater Will's agenda for Rykard's comfort. And eventually, for those who prove themselves worthy, she arranges an audience with Rykard. Rykard devours the worthy. This is not betrayal. It is the explicit transaction he offers. To join him is to be consumed and to become part of something larger. His slogan, "Join the Serpent King. As family, together we will devour the very gods," is meant literally. He's building a body capable of consuming divine authority, and he's doing it by incorporating everyone who comes to him with genuine purpose. There is something almost admirable in the clarity of it, and something deeply horrifying. Both things are true simultaneously. Morgoth, the Omen King, guards the approach to the Erdtree. He first appears much earlier in the story, at the main gate of Stormvale, appearing as Margit the Fell Omen, before revealing himself later as something far more significant. He is Marika's son, one of the twins born with the Omen curse, hidden in the depths beneath Leyndell, and treated as a shame by the Order that should have celebrated him. And yet Morgoth loves the Golden Order. He loves the Erdtree. Despite everything it did to him, despite the curse that marked him as impure in the system's own terms, he has devoted himself to protecting what his mother built. His tragedy is complete. He calls the Tarnished foul in the language of the Order that rejected him, defends the Erdtree with everything he has, and dies alone in the ruins of the capital he gave his life to protect. The last of the demigods standing between the Tarnished and the Erdtree, alone in a city whose golden age is long over, guarding a door that will not open anyway. Morgoth's death opens the way to the Erdtree, but the Erdtree does not open. The thorns, the physical manifestation of the Erdtree's refusal, the divine structure's rejection of the current state of things, are impenetrable. No one gets in, not even the Tarnished who has defeated everyone who stood in the way. To burn the Erdtree, which is the only way to create an entrance, requires a specific fire. The flame of ruin, the fire of the giants, the fire of the fell god that Marika's armies destroyed in the war against the giants. The last giant who carries this fire lives at the mountaintops of the giants, at the forge of the giants, where the fire has been maintained since the war ended. The only way to burn the Erdtree is to go there, to reach the forge, and to use its fire. And the only way to ignite the forge, Malenia explains, is with a kindling maiden, with her. Her purpose, the one she was given inside the Erdtree, the one she has been carrying since before the Tarnished met her, is this. She is the sacrifice. She burns so the Erdtree can burn. She offers this without self-pity. She offers it with the specific quality of acceptance that someone has, who has known their purpose for a long time and has made their peace with it. Even if peace is not quite the right word, she does not want to die. But she will, because this is what she was made for, and because burning the Erdtree is what needs to happen for any of the endings the story allows to be possible. Before we reach that moment, there is more of the world to understand. There is Leyndell itself, the royal capital, the city that was built around the Erdtree and that is now occupied by a different kind of presence than the living court that once filled it. There are the mountaintops and the fire giants and the forge, and there are the things happening underground, in the depths where Godwyn's body has been buried and where fire, the deathbed companion, has found him. Sleep well. The Erdtree is waiting, and so is everything it contains. Welcome back. Let everything slow down around you. We have arrived at the point in the story where everything accelerates. The demigods who held great runes have been confronted. The path to the capital has been opened. The Erdtree has refused entry. And now the Tarnished stands at the beginning of a series of events that will change the lands between permanently and irreversibly. A sequence of choices and consequences that constitutes the story's true turning point. But before any of that, there is Leyndell itself to understand. The royal capital is one of the most significant locations in Elden Ring, not simply as a location to fight through, but as a place whose physical state tells you everything about what the Golden Order was and what it has become. It is a city built around the Erdtree's roots, or organized by the specific logic of divine proximity. The closer to the tree, the more sacred the address. The Golden Knight statues, the vast domed spaces, the specific quality of grandeur that makes it feel less like a place people lived, and more like a monument to an idea that people were expected to live inside of. The giant dragon wing embedded in the city is one of its most memorable visual details, a colossal piece of the ancient dragon's physical legacy, incorporated into the architecture not as a trophy or a relic, but as something that simply became part of the city over time, as the city grew around it and through it, and eventually incorporated it as just another structural element. This is what happens when a civilization is old enough. The things that were once extraordinary become ordinary. The dragons who fought against the Golden Order's establishment are now structural components. The Elden Throne is the physical center of the capital, the seat of authority, the place from which the concept of Elden Lordship radiates. It is where Morgott makes his final stand, defending a city he knows is already lost, protecting a power structure that rejected him personally, but that he has made his identity. His defeat is one of the quieter emotional notes in the game's middle section. He is not wrong about the Tarnished being a trespasser. He is not wrong that the Erdtree will not admit them. He dies having been right about most of the specific things he was right about, and having served something that was not worth the service. Godfrey comes back. Year after Malekith's death releases the Rune of Death, and the Erdtree's ash transforms Lendel into a grey ruin. The first Elden Lord returns. Not the spiritual reduced version of himself that had been exiled. This is Godfrey in his original form. Huara, Lu, before the grace was placed upon him, and before the specific discipline of being Elden Lord shaped him into something less than what he was at his most elemental. He has been in distant lands for decades, fighting without grace, becoming something rawer and more honestly savage than the ceremonial warrior the Golden Order needed him to be. He comes back as he actually is, and when he finds Morgoth's body in the throne room, his own son, the son he never knew, the one born omen and hidden away, he holds it, gently, as a father would. This moment is brief and easy to miss. It is also one of the most quietly devastating things in the game. But all of this is after. Before the Erdtree burns, there are the mountaintops. The mountaintops of the giants are exactly what they sound like. A cold, high, ancient landscape above the main body of the lands between, where the last of the giants still exists. The fire giants were a civilization that predated the Golden Order, whose relationship to the fell god and to fire was the specific reason Marika's armies came to destroy them. Most of them were killed in that war. The last one was kept alive, not out of mercy, but because someone needed to tend the forge of the giants, needed to keep the fire burning, needed to be the guardian of the specific flame that only the giants knew how to maintain. Kept alive as a prisoner and a tool, chained to a purpose that serves the very order that killed everyone he knew. When you fight him, you are fighting something that has been alone for a very long time, in a cold place, maintaining a fire for a civilization that destroyed his. The fact that defeating him is necessary to access the forge does not make it feel like a victory. The forge of the giants. This is the point of no return, not the last point in the game, not the furthest location you will travel, but the point after which the world changes in ways that cannot be undone. You sit at the site of grace at the forge. Malenia appears. She says she will take care of the kindling. She says it without asking you to acknowledge what she is doing. She simply acts. She burns. The Erdtree begins to burn. The thorns are not immediately consumed. The fire is not sufficient yet. But the act of lighting the forge with the giant's flame constitutes what the game's lore calls the cardinal sin, the specific transgression that the Golden Order considers unforgivable. And for committing it, the Tarnished is transported, not through any ordinary mechanism of travel, but through the specific consequence of having done something that the order of the lands between cannot accommodate, to a place that should not exist in accessible form, Crumbling Farum Azula. This is a city in the sky, not metaphorically in the sky, literally suspended in the air, orbiting in a massive eternal storm, its architecture in a state of permanent slow collapse. The stone bridges and towers and buildings of Crumbling Farum Azula exist at impossible angles, half fallen, held in place by forces that normal physics should not permit. The storm around them is a physical presence, and the serpent dragons that inhabit the ruins are among the most formidable creatures the Tarnished has encountered. What is this place? It is ancient, older than the Golden Order, older than the Erdtree, older than almost anything else in the lands between. It was built in a previous age by or for the Dragon Lord Placidusax, who was the Elden Lord of the age before Marika's age. There was a different kind of order before the Greater Will established the current one. Placidusax served a god who has since fled the world. The details of what that god was and why it left are among the game's deeper mysteries. He has been waiting in Crumbling Farum Azula ever since, in a state of time-frozen expectation, keeping vigil for a return that has not come. The treasure the Tarnished is here to claim is inside this ancient ruin, Malenia, the keeper of the Rune of Death, the half-brother of Marika, the shadow-bound beast who has been carrying the sealed death in his blade since the Golden Order's establishment. Malenia has been living a double life throughout the game. As Gurranq, Beast Clergyman, he has been presenting himself as a cleric who collects and consumes Deathroot, the corrupted form of the Rune of Death that spread through the Erdtree's roots after Godwyn's murder. He has been trying to contain the contamination by consuming it, an act that is both genuinely useful and deeply painful. Each piece of Deathroot he eats increases his hunger and his instability. The Tarnished, if they followed this quest line, and has been bringing him Deathroot throughout the game, watching the Beast Clergyman become increasingly anguished. When the time comes, Gurranq reveals himself as Malenia, the black blade that had been hidden within him, the Rune of Death sealed in its edge. He fights to keep it. This is his duty, the purpose Marika gave him, the thing he has organized his entire existence around protecting. He calls out to Marika as he falls. His death releases the Rune of Death into the lands between. Not the controlled, deliberate release that would allow it to function as a scalpel. A wholesale unbinding. The Rune of Death flooding back into a world that had been sealed against it for the length of the Golden Order's reign. This changes things immediately and permanently. The characters who have been kept alive by the removal of the Rune of Death, who could not truly die while death was sealed, now can die. They begin to. The ash descends on Leyndell. The city that was golden becomes grey. The Erdtree, now touched by the Rune of Death and still burning from Melena's sacrifice, is finally penetrable. The thorns that blocked the entrance burn away in the combination of the giant's fire and the released death. Mohg. There is one more thing to understand before we enter the Erdtree, and it concerns Miquella. Mohg, Lord of Blood, is Marika's other twin, the one born with the Omen curse alongside Morgoth, the one who chose a completely different response to being rejected by the Golden Order. Where Morgoth devoted himself to the order that rejected him, Mohg devoted himself to an outer god who offered an alternative. The Formless Mother, a god of blood, an outer god whose domain is the specific power that blood represents, whose blessing manifests as the ability to afflict enemies with blood loss and to draw on the transformative power of bloodshed. Mohg built his own empire, his own palace, his own dynasty, in a hidden location accessible only through specific ritual. And he took Miquella, the extraordinary demigod, the one with the curse of eternal youth, the one who built the Haligtree and devoted years to trying to cure himself and his twin sister Malenia, was kidnapped by Mohg and placed in a cocoon. Mohg intended to make Miquella into a god through a blood ritual, to have a divine consort, to fulfill the specific vision that his devotion to the formless mother had given him. He nurtured the cocoon demigod with his own blood, speaking to him, waiting for him to emerge transformed. But Miquella had left his own body. His soul was elsewhere when Mohg found him, pursuing something that is only fully revealed in the DLC we are not covering here. The cocoon contained Miquella's body, but not Miquella himself. Mohg, who had given everything to this project, who had organized his entire post-shattering existence around it, was performing a ritual for an audience of one who was not there. When the Tarnished finds Mohg and defeats him, the palace with its blood-soaked architecture and its waiting cocoon is all that remains of the Lord of Blood's dynasty. Miquella's body, still in the cocoon, is inaccessible and silent. Sleep well. The Erdtree is burning. The final acts are about to begin. Welcome back. Let your breathing slow. We are getting close to the end, but there is still more of the world to understand before we arrive there. The path toward the Erdtree's interior is now open. The ash of Leyndell, the burning tree, Maliketh's defeat, and the release of the Rune of Death. These events have changed the lands between permanently, but the game is generous with its world in ways that the main narrative's forward momentum does not require. There are places the Tarnished can find that exist slightly outside the primary quest trajectory, and those places contain some of the most significant lore in the entire game. Miquella's Haligtree is one of them. The Haligtree is hidden. Access to it requires assembling a medallion from two separate pieces, one held by an Albinoric elder disguised as a pot in a village that is itself hidden, and one held by a knight at the top of a tower in a location that is not marked on any map. The consecrated snowfield where the Haligtree's portal can be found is a secret area within a secret area, accessible only through specific knowledge or thorough exploration. This is intentional. The Haligtree was meant to be a sanctuary, a hidden place, and even as a game location, it requires the kind of determined attention that a genuine sanctuary demands. What was the Haligtree? It was Miquella's alternative to the Erdtree. His project, begun decades before the Shattering, developed in parallel with his other work, was to create a sacred space that operated by different principles from the ones the Golden Order imposed. The Erdtree accepts those it deems worthy, according to the Greater Will's criteria. Miquella's Haligtree was meant to accept everyone, particularly those that the Golden Order had excluded. The Albinorics, beings whose specific origins and physical form placed them outside the Golden Order's framework. Those with the Omen curse, like his own brothers Morgoth and Mohg. People who had been told by the world's dominant religion that they did not belong in the spaces where belonging was granted. He poured himself into it. The specific magic he used to grow the Haligtree required a sacrifice of himself. He embedded his own body into the tree's roots at some point, hoping that the sacrifice of his physical form would accelerate the tree's growth and allow it to become what he envisioned it becoming. What happened instead was that the scarlet rot spread into the tree from its connection to Malenia, and Miquella's soul departed his body for reasons that the base game does not fully explain. The Haligtree now is a massive, partially rotted structure. Its upper levels are still functional, still bearing the marks of the sanctuary it was meant to be. The statues of Miquella and Malenia that the prayerful misbegotten bow before, the specific aesthetic of earnest religious devotion in a structure that was built to include rather than exclude. But the lower levels are consumed by the scarlet rot, and Malenia has descended to the roots, to what remains of Miquella's embedded form, sleeping. Malenia. She is the last of the major demigods the Tarnished encounters, and she is in every respect the most formidable, or the Blade of Miquella. Her title references both her weapon and her devotion to her brother. Everything she has done has been in service of Miquella and his project. The march to Caelid was for him. The battle with Radahn was a sacrifice she made to allow something Miquella needed. The specific combination of the scarlet rot's damage and her capacity to heal herself from every wound makes her the closest thing the Lands Between has to truly unkillable in combat. She bloomed 3 times in her history. Each bloom was an explosion of scarlet rot from her body, a last resort in moments of mortal extremity, the disease overriding her control and consuming everything around her in an act of survival that she did not entirely choose. The first bloom was in Caelid against Radahn. It turned Caelid into what you see throughout the game, and the second bloom would come if the Tarnished pushed her to her absolute limit in the Haligtree. The third, which she describes as the final one, is something that would happen after she died, a last bloom of the rot as a parting act, the scarlet rot finally released from the constraints of her living will. Her fight in the Haligtree is, for many Tarnished, the hardest encounter in the base game. She heals herself with each hit she lands, making the fight a race against a regenerating opponent who gets stronger the more damage she does. Her dialogue is one of the game's most achingly sad pieces of writing. She acknowledges that she has met her match. She speaks of her duty. She speaks of the scarlet rot as something she has always been at war with. And she dies with a dignity that feels earned rather than granted. The underground world has its own stories. The Deeproot depths are where Godwyn's body was buried, and what has become of it is one of the most visually disturbing things in the game. Godwyn the Golden, beloved, noble, everything the Golden Order produced at its best, is now the Prince of Death. His body, denied its soul, but denied death as well by the removal of the rune of death, has grown, has mutated, has spread through the Erdtree's root system in ways that mirror what happened to the tree itself. His face has replicated across the roots, huge and expressionless. His body has developed into something that looks like it should not exist. A massive fish-tailed form with the eyes of a god who is not there. Fear, the deathbed companion, has found him. She is one of the Roundtable Hold's occupants, the woman who hugs the Tarnished, and offering a warmth that the Hold's otherwise cold utilitarian atmosphere does not provide. She is also, as her full title suggests, someone with a specific relationship to the dead. She collects the warmth of champions by holding them, storing it in herself, and she has been building toward a specific purpose in the Deeproot depths. She wants to give Godwyn a second life, not his true life. His soul is gone. What she wants to give him is something new, something built from the accumulated warmth of the champions she has held. A prince of death who carries within him the memory and love of those who died with honor, who becomes the avatar of a different kind of death than the recycling function the Erdtree has always represented. Her project, and the mending rune of the Death Prince that it produces, represents one of the paths toward a different age, one in which death exists again, but death as it should be, as something that means something, rather than as the Erdtree's harvesting of souls. Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, who has been at the Roundtable hole throughout the game, providing information and presenting himself as an ally, has been conducting his own accounting of the situation. His final conclusion is a betrayal. He appears in the Ashen Capital to stop the Tarnished, not because he serves any demigod or any outer god, because he believes Marika wants the Elden Throne empty, because he has accumulated enough knowledge to believe that the entire project of becoming Elden Lord is a mistake, that Marika engineered the situation to produce endless aspirants who would destroy each other rather than succeed, and that becoming Elden Lord is not a triumph but a trap. He is not entirely wrong. The question of whether Marika wanted anyone to succeed, or whether she wanted the cycle of aspiration and failure to continue indefinitely, is one that the game's various endings answer differently. Gideon's reading of the evidence is coherent, even if his response to it, standing in the Tarnished's way, is not ultimately successful. After Gideon comes Godfrey, Huara Lu, the first Elden Lord, returned in his original form, fighting not to protect the Erdtree, but to prove himself worthy, to earn the right to be here at the end, in the moment that matters. He is not defending anything. He is competing. This is what he has always been, underneath the ceremony and the grace. A fighter, a being of pure martial purpose, who was briefly given a divine role, and who has spent the decades since being stripped of it, becoming more completely himself. Defeating Godfrey, the Tarnished enters the Erdtree, and there, in the space where the Golden Order's center has always been, is Marika, bound, crucified within the structure she created, the Elden Ring's remnants piercing through her, imprisoned by the Elden Beast, the Greater Will's physical presence in the world, as punishment for her shattering of the ring. The bonds break as the Tarnished approaches. Marika falls, and Radagon rises. This is the final statement of their divided nature. At the last moment, in the presence of the Tarnished who has come to determine the fate of the world, it is Radagon who asserts control. Marika's other half, the one who tried to repair the ring, the one whose runes are associated with the thorns that block the Erdtree's entrance. He does not yield. He fights. Sleep well. The last door is open. The final answer to what the lands between will become is just beyond it. Welcome back. This is nearly the end. Inside the Erdtree, in the golden void that exists at the center of the world's governing structure, the Tarnished faces what the Golden Order has always been, made manifest. First Radagon, then, when he falls, what he was carrying. Radagon of the Golden Order, his half of the Marika Radagon shared being, is the one that chose this fight, the one that tried to repair the Elden Ring after Marika shattered it, the one whose runes and symbols appear on the thorns that blocked the Erdtree's entrance for so long. He fights with the specific fury of someone defending something he believes in against someone who has, from his perspective, done nothing but tear apart what should have been preserved. He is also simultaneously Marika. The same hands that shattered the ring tried to repair it. The same body that was punished for an act of rebellion also contained the part that remained loyal. This is the final expression of the internal conflict that has been running through the game since the discovery of their shared nature. Not a conflict between two people, but a conflict within one person, played out across a shared body in ways that have shaped the history of the entire world. Radagon falls. The rune arc that Marika was crucified within, the fragment of the Elden Ring she was imprisoned by, breaks, and from the body of the last avatar of the Golden Order, the Elden Beast emerges. The Elden Beast is the living embodiment of the Elden Ring, the Greater Will's golden vassal, the thing that was sent from the cosmos to establish and maintain the order of the lands between. It is vast. The boss arena is a void scattered with stars, a cosmic space that reflects the Elden Beast's true nature as something from beyond the world, rather than native to it. It fights with the specific power of something that is the order of the world, made physical. Great arcs of golden light, the constellation shapes of the Elden Ring's runes deployed as weapons, the full expression of what the Greater Will has been doing in the lands between since it arrived. The Elden Beast is not evil in any conventional sense. It is not malicious. It is not even, in the human sense, intelligent about its own purposes. It is a cosmic structure, a living law, the implementation of an order that exists to serve the Greater Will's agenda. The fight against it is not a fight against a villain. It is a fight against the system itself, against the specific arrangement of power that has governed the lands between for the entire span of its recorded history. When the Elden Beast falls, the game arrives at its branching point. The Elden Ring's remnants lie on Radagon's broken body. Marika is present, in some form, in the space around the Tarnished, and depending on what the Tarnished has done during their journey through the lands between, which quest lines they completed, which mending runes they collected, whether they embrace specific forces, 6 different endings are available. The base ending, the one that requires no specific questline completion, is called the Age of Fracture. The Tarnished mends the Elden Ring. The Golden Order is restored. The Greater Will's arrangement continues, imperfect and diminished, but functional. The Tarnished becomes Elden Lord, as seated at the throne of a world that is not repaired so much as patched. This is not a triumphant ending in any deep sense. The problems that produce the Shattering, Marika's doubt, the specific failures of the Golden Order, the cosmic arrangement that serves the Greater Will at the expense of the people living under it, are not addressed. They are simply covered over. The world returns to something like what it was, except that the person at the center of it is now the Tarnished, who stepped into a role that was designed for someone else and is wearing it without having been shaped by it. This ending is honest about its own inadequacy. The game does not celebrate it. The Age of Order, achievable through the questline of Brother Corin and Goldmask, uses a mending rune to restore the Golden Order in a more refined form, one that removes the flaws and contradictions that Marika introduced, either deliberately or through the specific failures of her divine understanding. Goldmask spent his existence studying the laws of the Golden Order with a mathematician's intensity, trying to understand what the Order was supposed to be rather than what it had become. The mending rune of perfect order represents his conclusion. The order made consistent, the internal contradictions resolved. It is the most logically rigorous of the endings. It is also, in its way, the most cold. A world governed by perfect law, rather than by the messy ambiguity of actual human experience. The Age of Duskborn, achievable through Fia's questline, uses the mending rune of the Death Prince. It restores the Elden Ring with a specific modification. Death returns to the world in its natural form. Not the Erdtree's recycling of souls, not the immortality that the removal of the rune of death was supposed to provide, but actual death, the kind that means something, the kind that allows life to have shape and consequence. The Duskborn ending is one of the game's more melancholy outcomes, in the sense that it names the cost of what it offers. The world will have death again. People will lose things permanently, but they will also have the weight of genuine choice, because choices that cannot be lost do not weigh very much. The blessing of despair, achievable through the Dung Eater's questline, is the darkest of the Elden Lord paths. The Dung Eater is one of the game's most uncomfortable characters, a Tarnished whose specific evil is not ideological or ambitious, but simply sadistic, whose mending rune would curse the world with the same omen affliction that he bears, spreading his specific mark of rejection and suffering across every future generation. This is an ending that the game offers without endorsing. It represents what happens when the power to remake the world falls into hands that have no vision of human flourishing. The Frenzied Flame ending is something else entirely. The 3 fingers, the counterpart to the Greater Will's 2 fingers, associated with a force called the Flame of Frenzy that exists in opposition to the Greater Will's order, can be accessed deep beneath Leyndell's sewers, and embracing the 3 fingers marks the Tarnished as the Lord of the Frenzied Flame. The ending this produces is the destruction of everything, the Erdtree, the lands between, the order and the chaos and the people and the history all burned away by a fire that does not distinguish between what should be preserved and what should not. Malenia, if she survived to this point, appears in this ending as a promise of vengeance. She will bring destined death to the Lord of the Frenzied Flame. She will not let this be the final word on the world she accompanied the Tarnished through. The specific reading of the Frenzied Flame in the game's lore is that it represents a kind of liberation. The One Great, which the Greater Will fractured into divisions and souls and order and chaos, and all the apparatus of the current cosmology are restored to unity through destruction, an end to separation, an end to the specific loneliness that comes from being an individual rather than part of an undifferentiated whole. This is a philosophy of despair dressed as liberation, and the game knows it. And then there is Ranni's ending, the Age of Stars. If the Tarnished completed Ranni's questline, the long, elaborate journey through Nokron and Noxtella, and the Lake of Rot to the Cathedral of Maniceles. Ranni's spectral presence appears in the Erdtree after the Elden Beast defeat. She invites the Tarnished to be her consort, to accompany her on the journey she has been working toward since before the Night of Black Knives. Her ending is the one the game treats with the most aesthetic beauty. The Lands Between is released from the Greater Will's influence. The Erdtree fades, a dark moon rises, and Ranni departs into the cosmos, carrying the order that will govern the age to come. A cold, distant, non-dominating order. One that does not require the harvesting of souls or the suppression of death. One that allows for the kind of freedom that the Greater Will's arrangement has never permitted. The Tarnished becomes a tiny figure in her enormous hand as she ascends. This is the ending in which the world is most genuinely changed, in which the specific arrangement of power that has governed everything is actually replaced rather than simply patched. Whether the Age of Stars is better for the people of the Lands Between in practical terms is something the game does not specify. Ranni describes it as a cold and lonely path. She does not promise comfort or safety or certainty. She promises only the possibility of something new. What is the right ending? The game refuses to answer. This is not an oversight or an inability to commit. It is a philosophical position. The Lands Between is a world that has been under the authority of a cosmic being whose interests are not the same as the interests of the people living in it. Every proposed alternative comes with its own costs and uncertainties. The Tarnished, who arrived as an exile and fought through the ruins of a failed civilization, is being asked to determine the nature of a world they did not make and whose problems they did not cause. There is no clean answer to this question. There never is. The best endings acknowledge what they cost. The worst endings don't cost enough or cost too much. Sleep well. The world of the Lands Between awaits the next part of its story, in whichever form the Tarnished chose to give it. Welcome back. This is the last part. Take a moment with that. You have traveled through the entire history of the Lands Between. From the moment a golden star fell from a distant cosmos and a beast became a ring, through the long reign of a goddess who built a world and then, perhaps deliberately, broke it, through the night of black knives and the shattering and the long silence of a world waiting for something to come and determine what it would become next. You followed a Tarnished, exiled, graced, returned, through the ruins of every institution that the Golden Order produced and then failed to sustain. You met the demigods who inherited the pieces of something they could not put back together. You understood, gradually, the shape of a tragedy that no single person caused and no single person could resolve. And this final part is not new story. It is the part where we step back from the world and look at what it was made of and what it was made for. Elden Ring is about the relationship between order and the people who live inside it. This is the theme that every piece of the game's lore circles around, that every character's story is a variation of. The Greater Will imposed an order on the Lands Between that was not built for the well-being of the people it governed. It was built for the Greater Will's own purposes. The accumulation of power, the maintenance of control, the specific kind of cosmic self-interest that does not require malice, because it simply does not register the interests of others as mattering. Marika was the person tasked with implementing this order, as she was elevated to godhood and given power that exceeded anything any previous figure in the lands between had possessed, and she used that power to build something real, a civilization, an age of plenty, a world where grace meant something and death was managed rather than random. And then she looked at what she had built and understood, at some level, that it was a machine for feeding something that did not care about the people feeding it. Her rebellion, if that is what it was, is the most ambiguous act in the game. She shattered the Elden Ring. She may have orchestrated the Night of Black Knives. She created a daughter who would be the kindling for burning the Erdtree. She established the conditions that brought the Tarnished back. Whether all of this was a deliberate plan, or the accumulated consequences of a god who lost faith in her own purpose and began making choices that undermined the structure she had been maintaining. The game does not resolve this question cleanly. It holds both possibilities simultaneously. This ambiguity is not a flaw. It is the point. Elden Ring is also about inheritance. Every significant character in the game is defined by what they received and what they did with it. Godfrey received a lineage he could not live up to and responded with grotesque compensatory violence. Ranni received love and lost it, and has been trying to recreate it in the wrong direction ever since. Radahn received power and purpose, and the Scarlet Rot took both. Malenia received the rot itself, and made herself into the greatest warrior in the world in response. Not despite the disease, but through the discipline that living with it required. Miquella received eternal youth, and used it to build a sanctuary for those who had received the least. Ranni received the fate of becoming the next vessel of the Greater Will's order, and rejected it. Her entire story is the story of what it cost to refuse what was given to you, to insist on the possibility of something different, to work with extraordinary patience and intelligence toward a world that doesn't yet exist. She is the game's most complete portrait of what genuine resistance to an unjust order looks like. Not a dramatic moment of defiance, but decades of careful, invisible work. The Tarnished received nothing. So this is the specific condition of the Tarnished in the lands between social structure. Stripped of grace, exiled, denied access to the divine framework that gave everyone else their identity and place. The game begins with the Tarnished as the person who has been excluded from everything the world considers worth having, and ends with that person determining what the world becomes. This is a story that the game tells without making it feel schematic or mechanical. The specific details of every region and character you encounter accumulate into something true about what it means to come from outside a system and then be asked to decide that system's future. The lands between is a world in which everyone is trying to resolve their own relationship to inheritance. The things they were given, the things they were denied, as the things that were done before they existed, that continue to shape what is possible for them. The shattering was not caused by any single person's evil. It was the accumulated consequence of a cosmic arrangement whose internal contradictions eventually became impossible to contain. The demigods who tore the world apart were each, in their own way, responding to something real about their situation. There is something in Elden Ring about the specific quality of worlds that have been organized around an idea that turned out to be insufficient. The Golden Order was not simply wrong. It produced things that were genuinely valuable. A civilization with moments of real beauty and real meaning. But it was built on a foundation that could not support it indefinitely. And when the foundation cracked, everything built on top of it cracked too. And this is not a story unique to fantasy worlds. The visual design of the lands between carries this theme in every environment. The ruins that are everywhere, the shattered castles, the abandoned churches, the capital covered in ash, are not simply set dressing. They are the physical record of what the Golden Order built and what became of it. You walk through the aftermath of a civilization that believed in itself completely and was, in the end, not sufficient. Not because the people in it were evil or stupid or uniquely flawed, because the thing they organized their world around was not capable of being what they needed it to be. George R.R. Martin provided the initial world building, the deep history, the family structures, the specific texture of a world whose past is as vivid as its present. Hidetaka Miyazaki, and From Software built on top of that foundation. The specific interactive experience of discovering that world in fragments, of assembling understanding gradually, of having the emotional arc of the story emerge from exploration, rather than be delivered through exposition. The collaboration produced something that neither approach alone would have created. A world that feels both historically dense and personally discovered, both ancient and immediate. The question the game ends with is not resolved. What is the right order? What should the lands between become? Who should determine it? And on what basis? These are not questions with clean answers because they are not meant to be questions with clean answers. They are meant to be questions that the Tarnished carries out of the Erdtree and into whatever age follows. Or Elden Ring asks you to hold all of this. The weight of a world's history, the complexity of its characters, the ambiguity of every proposed resolution. And to make a choice anyway. Not because the choice is easy, or because one option is obviously correct, but because the world requires someone to choose. This is what the Tarnished has always been in the story's logic. The person who does not belong to any faction or any tradition, who owes no loyalty to any of the arrangements that produced the Shattering, who can look at the ruins of the Golden Order and decide freely what, if anything, should be built in its place. That is a heavy thing to be, and Elden Ring is honest about the weight of it. Good night. This has been the entire Elden Ring story. The Greater Will, the Crucible, the Age of Marika, the Night of Black Knives, the Shattering, and every demigod, rebel, exile, and dreamer who tried to determine what the lands between would become. The grace has led you here. Whatever comes next is yours to carry. Rest. The Erdtree can wait.